Hello, hello. Good afternoon, or morning, or evening, depending on where you are in the world. And let's give it a second here as everybody joins up. And speaking of in the world, for those of you who've been to this before, you know how we get started. Post it up. Where have we got people coming from? Drop it in the chat, your location. I'll start Vancouver right here. I was in Santa Fe last week, back in Vancouver. Oh, we got Santa Fe. Arizona, Santa Fe. We got the Netherlands. All right, that wins furthest away so far. Fantastic. Jersey, Scottsdale, Toronto, Florida, Tel Aviv. All right. That I think I think that beats Netherlands for distance. Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. Good stuff. All right. And one second as I get my screen organized here. All right, welcome, welcome, welcome. So today, I've been looking forward to this conversation. Our guest today is somebody that MEA has had a close relationship with ever since we moved to Santa Fe and opened our property there. She's a nature-based executive, a coach, founder of the EQUUS Experience, and the EQUUS Experience is what has guided our horse work as well on the ranch in Santa Fe. She's the author of Flying Lead Change, and her work is about helping people reconnect with their instincts and lead from a more grounded, authentic place. And she's got a really interesting background studying neuroscience, neuropsychology, and then blending that with indigenous wisdom and traditions that she, well, has studied across 4 continents, and blending the two using horses in the process. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Kelly Wendorf. Kelly, thank you so much for joining.
Hi, Derek. Hi, everybody. MEA family. Nice to be here.
Yes, great to have you back. It's not your first rodeo with us, and we've got another workshop coming up with you here shortly. And so let's dive in here. And actually, where I always love to start is kind of the background and sort of your journey of how you brought together, I mean, indigenous wisdom, horses, executive coaching. How did you end up here?
Yeah, but that unique confluence.
Yes.
So I'm a Santa Fe native. I was born and raised here. My father ran the Laboratory of Anthropology in Santa Fe in the 60s. And, in those days, we were pretty much most of us were parented by benign neglect. And I say that with all warmth and gratitude. And, we were just left to our own devices. So a lot of my childhood time was spent out either on archaeological digs with my father. He worked in northern New Mexico and also the Sahara, Ethiopia, Egypt, and the Sudan, and or just out in nature. And at a young age, I became absolutely horse crazy when I was 4. So, and nagged my parents for years and years until I finally got my own horse. So, spent just my time between those 3 places: indigenous communities, both contemporary ones and ancient, ancient dwellings, and nature and the horse. And I had a very unconventional education by those 3 influences. And so it created a kind of schism in my young life as a child, because I would see, especially in indigenous communities, how much a community thrived, how connected they were, how calm and peaceful they were, and kind. And then I would go into my second grade classroom and just see how bullying would happen, and power plays, and people not being very kind to nature. And so I just, there was a real tension between those 2 worlds. And then later, as I became an adult, I became very, very curious about the kinds of conditions that we needed as a species, as a society, to create just and sustainable environments, or a just and sustainable world. And so that question about what are those conditions that we need in order to thrive, basically, was really what led me through my career. I was a magazine editor for a while in Australia. I lived in Australia for 20 years, and was privy to a lot of evidence-based material, especially sort of the neuroscience of how we develop and grow, and the neuroscience behind how we become thoughtful, compassionate human beings, how we
Mm,
learn and grow. What's the difference between a dictator's brain and someone who cares about others? And there are real differences. And what I learned through doing this magazine was that you could give people as much information as possible, evidence-based, really robust material. But if they weren't experiencing things with their body, they weren't really learning. And there's only so far cognitive understanding can go. So very, very long story short, I became an executive coach, but I wanted to provide possibilities for people to have experiential processes that would lead to fundamental changes that would sustain in their life. So, Derek, like you've probably had the experience where you have an insight. Maybe the insight might be, I need to take better care of myself, or I need to be better at setting that boundary with my kids. But that understanding doesn't lead to the actual change happening. And so you're like, dang, like I know I need to change this thing, but I just can't change this thing. And so the really where the rubber meets the road is that experiential opportunity. So this is why I partner with nature, because
mm,
the most wonderful co-facilitator of deep experiential learning is nature, because nature is very uncompromising. So I do a lot of nature-based experiences in my work. When people come to my little ranch that's neighboring your ranch, just over the hill as the crow flies, and we work with indigenous wisdom and a lot of different nature-based experiences and biomimicry, and we also work with my herd of horses. So that's kind of it in a nutshell.
Okay, so let's dig in. One of the things you talk about is this idea that as kids, we make trade-offs, we give up parts of ourselves to fit in with families and
Hmm.
communities that we're
Hmm.
raised in.
Hmm.
Um, what are we giving up? What does that look like? And then how is that showing up for us later in life?
Yeah, so one of the reasons, and I'm going to circle round to answering that
Okay.
question, um, and I will answer it. But one of the reasons why I'm super excited about this workshop that I'll be doing is that it really does face head on our relationship to power. And especially right now, when we're kind of seeing on the world stage that we are witnessing abuse of power all over the place. And here close to home, of course, in our country, the dismantling of our democracy, DEI being weaponized, misogyny is now being celebrated and legislated. And it's a really, really intense time for all of us. And from my point of view, none of this is political. It's all about power and
Mhm.
our relationship to power. And so I want to support people to help claim their voice, speak to power, whether that is power inside the power dynamic inside their family, or a power dynamic inside an intimate relationship, or a power dynamic in their community or at work, or even in this larger context of what's happening in our country. We have to know how to step forward and be skillful and strong and clear and authentic in our communication. And of course, where this tension starts is in childhood. And when we're small, we are constantly held in this place, this choice point of we either get to belong to ourselves or we get to belong to our community, our family, our church, our school, whatever. But very often the two don't come together. In order to belong to my family, I have to betray myself in some way. In order to keep this marriage going, I have to betray myself in some way. And this is one of the things that um, does not happen in intact Indigenous communities. One does not have to give up parts of oneself in order to belong to the community or to a family. That is not a choice that we have to make. But as contemporary humans, this is something we have to do all the time. So we learn to either fuse with our family of origin or our church or our institution and kind of lose track of ourselves,
Hmm.
or we become hyper boundaried with very rigid boundaries and very more individualistic in our thinking. And that doesn't work either because we're not designed to be separate individuals. We're wired to connect and interrelate. So the big question is, how do I coexist with my community, my family, my relationship, and not lose myself? Um, how do I articulate who I am without being either punished by the other or manipulated by the other or abandoned by the other?
Mm. So what are indigenous communities doing differently than Western society, how we grew up to?
That's a great question. And I'm not an anthropologist.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but so I can only speak from my experience. And also it was in speaking with many of my friends who are Indigenous and asking questions like that. But how I see it is that first and foremost, they, well, we look at like their birthing practices. The child is born very often close to the mother's body. They're breastfed. They live in close communities. So there's all this very close skin to skin
Hmm.
proximity and contact, which allows a tiny being to understand that they are not separate from life. And that sense of being not separate creates a kind of existential safety that I can be me because there's no way I can be abandoned. And so that's kind of pre-verbal stuff.
Hmm.
You can compare and contrast that to a contemporary story for a child in modern America. Very often they're born by C-section. Very often, once they're born, they're separated from the mother. They're put in a crib. They're put in a stroller. Everything is far away and disconnected. So that's one piece.
Hmm.
Um, and the other is that just as a whole, their understanding that they are in kinship with the natural world. So it's not just kind of this feel good idea for them. For them, this rock is my brother or my sister. I am in kinship, just as I am in kinship with the MEA community, or I'm in kinship with my children. Just the fact that they're not necessarily human doesn't make them A, not sentient, and B, not in kinship with me. And so it's this kinship and this biological birthright
Hmm.
of connection and belonging that is the foundation. And when you start from that place, then these other machinations around can I belong to myself and belong to this community aren't even really, that don't even come to play.
Right.
The good news is that we don't have to go back and live in a cave. We don't have to we don't have to like somehow abandon our contemporary way of doing to rewire what we should have had when we were children. And this is where a lot of my work comes in, that our nervous system and our brain is highly plastic and impressionable, and we can shape these connections and connect this kind of connective tissue. We can bring it back into our nervous system so that we embody that sense of connection with between ourselves and the natural world, between ourselves and each other. and feel the felt sense of our own differentiation as a human.
Okay, so well, let's dig into this neurobiology then.
Okay.
Yeah,
You're
because I
going to
think
challenge
that's
me.
where we're going. And I
I
love that
better
we're going
put,
from
wait,
like,
I better put on my glasses for this part. Here we go.
okay,
Let's do it.
okay.
Okay. I'm going to look smart now.
Okay. And I love that. I mean, we're jumping from indigenous wisdom to neurobiology here.
Yes.
And that's amazing. So you talk about how our brains and bodies store patterns of making ourselves smaller. Can you talk us through that? And how do you rewire these old patterns to break out of that?
Yeah. So, and I'm assuming what you mean when you say make ourselves smaller, is like ways that we trade ourselves away. We diminish
Yeah,
ourselves, we diminish our
exactly.
energy, we diminish what we really want to say. We have a conversation with someone and we kind of get all ready for it and we know what we want to say. And then the moment comes and we leave the conversation going, I didn't really say it. I didn't really express myself.
Mhm.
Um, and so, of course, that self-diminishment, and people can, when people are taught that their presence doesn't matter, then their psychology can then um, uh, activate in one of two different ways. They can either become hyper, a grandiose sense of themselves and their rights and who they are and how the world should move around them, or a diminished sense, and somewhere in between, we
Mhm.
all are kind of on that spectrum. And so, part of the key to rewiring a sense of healthy self entitlement, and I use that word very deliberately, that term, healthy self entitlement. I mean, the word entitlement kind of makes a lot of people do this because we do live in a very entitled society. That is part of the product of this separation, is a hyper sense of I'm entitled to all this stuff, and and that is not maturation. That is not true agency. But the healthy sense of self-entitlement, the healthy self-agency happens through practicing again and again and again, articulating oneself in challenging situations where they're going to get pushback. But here's the key. We can, we can have a lot of skill sets. We can learn things like nonviolent communication and I statements and sharing impact and stating oneself clearly. But none of that is going to be effective if we don't know how to regulate our nervous system. So what happens the moment we get, let's say you and I have to have a difficult conversation. I'm just the idea of knowing I have to have a difficult conversation with you will activate my nervous system into fight or flight. Just the thought of it, because I'm a conflict averse person. I don't like conflict. I'm highly addicted to people liking me. And so it can be very like, ugh. So the the thing with the fight or flight response is that that's the amygdala, and
Mhm.
when it starts to take over, and all I have to do is imagine something, and the amygdala can start, right? Our nervous system doesn't know the difference between what's real and what we imagine. So there's fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. Not many people talk about that fourth one. So fawn is like throwing meat to the tiger. So maybe I'm about to have a difficult conversation with you, and I don't want to fight with you. I don't want to freeze. I don't want to run away. But what I might do is fawn, which is I might kind of please you or give you more of what you want, or kind of diminish myself in some way to just look like I'm not a threat to you.
Mhm.
And none of that is a very good strategy because it's all based in the amygdala. And the amygdala is very old and ancient and reptilian and doesn't really know that I'm actually in front of my friend Derek, who's
Mhm.
actually a friend, and we're going to get through this. So, learning about one's nervous system and how we get dysregulated and what conditions create dysregulation and how to track it and
Mhm.
spot it, tend to it, regulate it, then all those skills you've learned about how to have a good, mature conversation with them, they'll come back online. But if we don't know how to regulate our nervous system, then we'll never be able to practice those healthy self-agency tools.
So when you're approaching a conflict, for example, what are some of the strategies you'd use to self-regulate in the moment?
So one of the things, and we'll practice this in the workshop, is cultivating a relationship with your nervous system when you're not in the fire of it, right? And you're not in the fire of a hard conversation or the fire of an argument. You want to do reps in the gym of your nervous system when things are easy. So you're kind of training your nervous system for, first of all, you're training yourself to be self-aware. What is my body telling me right now? What's going on in this moment? What am I wanting to rush past or numb or, get on my phone and get on social media? No, maybe I'm going to just, and we teach it in my class here at EQUUS called, a lot of the material I'm going to do in this workshop is from this class,
Mhm.
Assertiveness for Life and Leadership. But we learn to recognize when our body is starting to show signals of distress. Ideally, we start to recognize it when the green light just starts to turn yellow, barely, right?
Mhm.
Eventually you start to get good, not only for yourself, but like watching those you care about too, your friends, your colleagues, your coworkers, like, oh, I just saw that little hardness of the eye that is signaling to me that they're dysregulated, or my horse, for example. But we start to practice self-awareness around what our nervous system is telling us, what our body is telling us, and then using different ways to then attend to that nervous system. So sometimes it's breath work. Sometimes it's just going and hanging out with a tree. Sometimes it's going and hanging out with a herd of horses, and starting to become very literate about the impact that you are having on your nervous system through these different approaches. And part of this too for me is to really normalize dysregulation and normalize discomfort, because all these sort of spiritual platitudes, I call it, oh, well, I don't call it, but I like to name it spiritual bypassing, like just let it go. This soon will pass, all that stuff. All it does is dismiss the nervous system and it sets us up for being dysregulated. So instead, I'm like, no, we're going to turn and face it and be with it and embrace it and allow it to talk to us and not run away from the discomfort, and thereby cultivating a greater capacity to feel discomfort and be more skilled at regulating your nervous system, so that, so we learn a lot of that. And then we're going to do a lot of role play of saying it like it is, sharing impact, giving feedback, all those things that kind of make people like, I don't want to do that thing, so
Mhm.
that people can work with their nervous system, get regulated, say the words they need to say. And some of that has to do with, as kids, we weren't often modeled what, conscious conflict could look like. We
Mhm.
weren't shown the words to use, so we don't really have it in our brain. Like, what am I going to say? So I help people with those things as well. Just simple one-liners that just, help you wade into those difficult conversations with a lot more confidence.
Could you share one of these one-liners with us?
Yes. So, okay, I'm gonna go straight to the lion, the belly of the beast. We if you'll notice some of the news cycles that are on right now, you'll notice how there's a lot of gaslighting at play, and excusing and diminishing and equalizing. Like there's all these, if you want to see the narcissist playbook, just look at, it's just all there, like all 36 skills. It's
Yeah.
just like right there.
Yeah.
And then you watch. people who don't operate in that way. I mean, we have a lot of, bad actors right now not operating in good faith
Hmm.
and just doing it out there. So, wow, what a great education. And you'll watch how, like, the reporter or the journalist or the commentator or the whatever will try to talk reason. Like, I'm just going to talk reason to you because surely if you knew the fact, you wouldn't be saying all this stuff. Well, no. I mean, that kind of mindset that's very predatory and narcissistic and power over doesn't want to hear you. They don't want to hear you. They don't want to know you. They don't want to get you. They don't want to see you. They don't want to understand you. And this can be a kind of person, or it can be a person who's just in a really bad state, right? Like we can all be jerks, right?
Sure.
So if I'm really, really dysregulated, I can act like one of those people too. So this is for all of us. When you're in one of these things where you're tempted to explain yourself, justify yourself, tell the truth just one more time, because the person you're talking to, like, is either feigning they don't understand or completely distorting the truth, or you know what I mean? You've
Hmm.
been with these sorts of,
Hmm.
right? You just stop and you say, I see what you're doing. And you walk away. Because there is no point
No.
in trying to engage when it's at that level, right? I see what you're doing. It won't work anymore. That's the other part of that line. Um, Boy, if I had had that line for the last 40 years,
Oh my God. I know,
right?
100%. Yeah,
Mm-hmm,
100%.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I grew up with a narcissistic mother that I've had, and I'm like, where was that line when I was
Right?
10?
Right? Yes. So thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you, Derek, because my father also was a narcissist,
Mhm.
and I got a great education from him
Yeah.
on this stuff. But how much someone who's in the mindset of so we talk about power with, we're going to do this, we're going to get through this together, we can find a solution, we'll do a win-win. That's a power with mindset. Power over is, no, I'm going to win, and if I'm not winning, I'm losing.
Yeah.
And so when a power with person or power with mindset comes at a power over, the power over interprets your wanting to work it out as is a battle.
Right.
You're trying to make me lose because you're not allowing me to win.
Yeah.
And so there is no working with that. There is no. And you find at some point you learn to recognize those toxic patterns,
Mhm.
see them for what they are, and just back away from the table, because anything else is just going to get you in a worse and worse and worse place. So that's a good one liner right there.
Yeah.
Another one is no. No is a full sentence. Just no.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. Yeah. I mean, the amount of time, and yeah, I mean, if you grew up with narcissistic parent, the amount of time you will put in trying to reason with, trying to,
Yes.
but you're
Yes.
never going to get there. And it just leads to agony, anguish, and frustration.
Yes.
And
And worse, because the more frustrated you become, the more dysregulated you become. And I will confess that then I end up becoming the villain because
yeah,
at some point I just come out so hot, right? Because my back has been against the wall. And
yeah,
that's exactly by design how it needs to be, how that's by design,
yeah,
right? So that you then become the villain, and you just don't want to do that to yourself. So this workshop is about your garden variety, just people not being very skillful together,
yeah,
all the way to the super toxic.
yeah,
Because I feel like this is a time when our voice is so needed, anywhere, right? Wherever, like if we at the community meeting around taking care of our water system, or in our PTA meeting for our kid, like our voice is needed. And according to indigenous societies and also with the horse herd, what we learn is that the leaders are the ones who care the most, and who are the most present. Leaders are not the dominant, charismatic, bullies. That is not leadership. It's something else. It's not leadership, but we've been taught that's leadership.
Mhm.
Leadership is actually those who care the most and who are the most present. And there are a ton of those sorts of folks in the MEA community who may not imagine that they have a leadership place in the world, whether it's taking more leadership with their family or taking more leadership in a little community or in a whole organization. But because they care, because they're present, because they're empathic, they think, maybe my leadership doesn't matter. But I would say it's exactly the opposite. And so my hope is that I can help empower sensitive, more empathic, caring, present people to show up with a strong voice and to be resilient in the face of pushback, because boy, oh boy, the pushback is real.
Mhm.
And so we have to be ready for that when we start, because there's a lot of change back behavior, right? Like, wait, you've always been, ready to bend over backwards, and now you're not.
Mhm.
Why are you doing this to me?
Mm.
To me.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, well, so let's dig in. Let's talk a little bit about horses now.
Okay.
I mean, you created the EQUUS Experience. That's been the guiding foundation for what we've done in Santa Fe there. So you're using horses to help people reconnect with instincts, to break old patterns. Uh, why horses? Let's talk
And
about
and I would say I'm partnering with horses.
that. Okay.
They are by far so much wiser than me. Um, and um, and they have a volition inside the co-facilitation space that is remarkable. Um, and if people don't want to see it, the horse is like, okay,
Hmm.
your loss. And that's fine. Like they just have that kind of grace about them.
Hmm.
So why, why not bees or dogs or whatever, deer? Um, so there's a couple of reasons that make horses consummate co-facilitators. One has to do with their biological longevity. So, the natural world is 3.8 billion years. And of all the species that have ever been on planet Earth, only 1% remain. 99% have gone extinct or evolved to new forms. So, of that 1%, the horse is among the oldest and most successful, second only to the platypus. This next in line is the horse, is the oldest mammal, 56 million years. So you've got an animal, a system, the horse herd, that has lived through tectonic shifts, climate spikes, volcanic mega explosions, pandemics, dictatorships, and survived and thrived. And so why? Like, why them? What is it about how they organize themselves, who they are, how they're wired, that's allowed them to be so highly successful? And that's a question that biomimicry ask. Biomimicry is a pretty newly emerging field that is basically looking to nature to solve our human problems. And so
Hmm.
if we look at horses from a biomimetic point of view, then we start to ask some important questions. One of the things that we found is that the horse has a culture. Like elephants and wolves and gorillas have a culture. And that culture is focused on 5 core values: safety, connection, peace, freedom, and joy. So 56 million years of thriving because they do not deviate from safety, connection, peace, freedom, and joy. The leader is selected based on their ability to uphold those 5 core premises and through care and presence.
Hmm.
So imagine if we were to lead our institutions through care and presence to uphold safety, connection, peace, freedom, and joy, what a different world it would be. Or if I aligned my life or my organization's life on those principles. So that's part of it, part of why they're great, because that's the lens through which they're looking.
Hmm.
And we get to be in their company, and our smaller nervous system is allowed to be positively informed and influenced by their very large nervous system. So when you create conditions where people are slowing down, they're listening, they're pausing, they're reflecting, they're not just doing with the horse, but they're just being, then those things can start coming into play. Another reason why the horse is, and they're highly sensitive, and they can't lie. They're not going to lie. As animals of prey, if they were to pretend that somebody was in their midst who was not being present, if they were going to act like, well, I kind of like the guy, and he's got some cute genes on there, so I just don't think I'm going to give him the feedback. Well, they would not last 56 million years. So they're very direct. They're very clear about what's working and what's not working. And here's what I can reflect back to you. And they do it because once we're in their midst, we are in their herd. So we're part of their family in that moment. They don't think, oh, here comes Derek. He's got two legs and no fur. He's not one of us. If you're in their midst, you're one of them because you are one of them, unless you're a predator. So um, the other reason why they're amazing co-facilitators, I think, has to do more with how the indigenous peoples recognize the horse as a wisdom companion. So the horse originated in Wyoming. He did not come from the Spanish. He originated in Wyoming in a place called the Polecat Bench. There's a long, long, long history of partnership between ancient societies in North and South America and the horse. And there are prophecy stories of the horse as a very special wisdom companion, more kind of beloved from all the others. And in some of these stories, they don't even name the horse because it's such a sacred, they can't, the word is so sacred, it cannot be named. And in my book, Flying Lead Change, I talk about this prophecy story called The Promise, which is really just an amalgamation of a few stories that my father heard and some stories that I had heard. But these stories are ubiquitous across North and South America that basically say human beings separated from the earth. They began to behave badly. They got very, very lost. The horse and all the animals stopped talking to them. But the horse made a promise that he would come back. And when he came back, it would start a time of the great outwaiting. And that is a time when all of life looks at humanity and looks to see what they're going to choose, love or fear. And we are there right now. And when the horses did come back, when they migrated across the Bering Strait, went to China and Russia, went to the Iberian Peninsula, ended up on some Spanish ships, came over across the ocean again, that began the start of this prophecy. And so when the native people saw the horses disembarking from these ships, they fell to their knees, not because they were like in such awe of the Spanish, but because the horse had returned. And
Mm.
so we are in that era of all of creation looking to see, are we going to choose love or fear? And the horse took upon itself to be a beloved companion to help us choose love.
Mm.
And it's been my experience that when I work with my horses in this context of the human heart, they really do show up in that way. And it's very, very powerful. And I just think there is no accident that the horse assisted industry is starting to mushroom around the time when it's getting very, very dark here on planet Earth for humans. So that's another reason why they,
Wow. So,
yes.
can you walk us through and even give an example of what does that experience look like? How is the horse communicating with somebody when you're running an experience like that? Some people very few people spend a lot of time around horses, right? H- how how does this work? How does it play out?
So for some people, if they were looking, from a balcony, they
Hmm.
would be like, there's nothing going on. And there's so much going on. Horses, as animals of prey, are very naturally energy conservers. They conserve their energy, and they're very deliberate about how they use their energy because energy makes a difference between getting away from the lion and not getting away from the lion. So they're subtle. A shift of weight is a significant gesture. A twist of one ear is a significant gesture because it took energy.
Mm,
So my job is I invite participants to go in and not use words, just to kind of be quiet because we're dropping into a different domain where everything is nonverbal and where you want to have the attunement to notice what's happening. I encourage people to go in with an intention for what they want to learn. What would they ask a 56 million year old teacher? What would they want to know? And then, my job is to just hold the space and allow for things to unfold. Um, and usually they don't need my interpretation. It's like all their intuition starts to come online and they start to notice that, for example, they might notice, for example, that when they first walked in, they were a little bit scrambled and didn't know quite what to do. But then the moment they felt themselves get grounded, the horse next to them started yawning. Why did the horse start yawning? It's not because he's bored, but when a horse yawns, it's a very powerful, positive emotional release. It's basically the horse saying, all of this feels very congruent. It feels very aligned. So basically, he's giving biofeedback in real time of,
mhm,
yeah, when you finally dropped into your body and you felt yourself get grounded, that felt good. And
mm,
so it's basically just a lot of biofeedback loops going on. But there's
mhm,
other like really magical things that happen, really, really magical things that can happen, like horses mimicking an animal that has passed. Somebody lost a beloved dog, and that dog used to always lick them here on the cheek when they came home from work. And then a horse comes and does that. And most horses usually don't lick people's faces. So you notice these remarkable behaviors. And why would he do that? Why would the horse do that? Well, in this case, the woman was just absolutely refusing to acknowledge her grief, and it was impacting her bottom line at work. She was not showing up for work well and just kept dismissing her grief as like, it's just a dog and I need to just get over it. And people can't handle my grief and all that story. And it was having an impact. She didn't realize all this at all. She came in wanting to figure out how to be more effective at work. The horse licks her face. She's on her knees crying, releasing all this grief that she's been bottling up for the last year. And it suddenly becomes so crystal clear to her what's happened. A month later, her numbers are different again. So they just seem to sense what a person needs in the moment that's going to help them to get back aligned with their best timeline, their highest good, their optimal way of being. And it's never too much and it's never too little and it's always
mhm.
just right.
Wow.
And it's very powerful.
And so in some cases, people can identify what's happening, but it sounds like in a lot of cases, you're there with your experience, almost translating
Yeah.
these subtleties that someone like myself is never going to notice.
Well, you say that, but you would get there and then I might kind of nudge something your way, but I'm not going to tell you what it is yet. You know, I don't like to trade people's gold for silver. So you finding the answer is going to be much more powerful than me just spoon feeding it to you. But I might say, I noticed that both the donkeys went out of their way to walk up behind you and like they're standing behind you really close. What is that for you? And you might go, well, I don't know, blah, blah. And I go, well, how does it feel? How does it feel to have those two at your back? And then, you might suddenly drop into some feeling and then you start to get clear. Because it's not random in there. There's nothing about what happens with the horses that's
Mhm,
random because it all takes energy. So dogs and cats will be random because they can burn a lot of energy unnecessarily and just miss lunch. They don't become lunch. But
mhm,
with animals of prey, it's very deliberate. So a coach's job is to ask powerful questions,
Hmm.
not ask leading questions, just keep finding ways that questions can help liberate somebody's knowing. And that way people are coming up with answers that are relevant and right for them rather than what I think they should be getting out of this experience.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so what I'd love to do, and first I could talk to you about the horses all day. As I've told you, when I'm on the ranch, I stay in the barn. I wake up, a little apartment there. I've got the horses
That's so
outside my
nice.
window in the morning. It's a special place, and there is something about those animals
Hmm.
that is, as someone, I mean, I grew up on a farm. I've been around animals all my life. Horses are a different. They bring a different
Yes.
energy than
Yeah,
any
they
other
do.
animal.
They do. And that's why I think this, the the cosmology of the indigenous perspective is very relevant because
Hmm.
you can feel it. I mean, there's a reason why poets and visionaries and leaders since the beginning of time have, horse, is
Hmm.
in their imagination, right? It just conjures so much. And so they are magical.
Yeah. So, I'd love to open it up to some questions if you don't
Oh,
mind.
sure.
I always love to do that. But before we do, so for those of you that have questions, just raise your hand and I'll get you guys to unmute. Um, but let's just talk about the workshop that is coming up. So that's going to be at our ranch in Santa Fe. Um, and if I had to frame it as who is this workshop for, what would your answer be?
You know, well, I would say everything from midwives to leaders to, house dads to CEOs. Anyone who, when they're honest with themselves, they say, I'd like to be better in the interpersonal space. I'd like to articulate myself more clearly. I would like to stop walking away from conflict. I would like to be braver. Um, and I have something to say or something to create in this world, but I tend to defer and I want to change that. So,
Good.
yeah.
And and I know people will have questions about are we spending time with the horses in this workshop? And the answer is
Well, yes, and if you have too much time with the horse, is
mhm.
the horse is like a really good spice. And if you add too much of it,
Yeah,
people get maxed out. And so it's a part of the workshop. And we use it very well. I'll just say it that way.
yes. Um, and I'm hoping I'm going to be there so that I can participate. I would love to see you in action with the horse.
Oh, I love that,
Really,
Derek.
that is absolutely on my list. So let's open it up for some questions. And Robbie Lane.
Thank you. I had a quick question on can the work affect the health of the horses? So is it okay for all horses
Oh,
or
that's
is
a great question. The horse assisted industry is unregulated. So that means you've got a vast spectrum of skill sets going on in terms of how the horses are managed and trained and cared for. And so the answer is yes and no. If the horse doesn't have a choice, if the horse is trained in the usual conventional power over model that's so prevalent in the horse community, no. If the horse is used as a medicine ball just to get from A to B, no. They get burnout. It's hard on them. If they are given free choice, or if they get to live and work together like they're naturally wired to do, if they're trained in a very power with like liberty work or what kind of more relational kinds of horsemanship where you're really listening. I argue that the problem with horse whispering is that we're doing all the talking still. So, what good is that? We've had a good, we're evolving a lot as a horse community, but we have a long way to go. So, but the horse will tell you. The horse will tell you if he or she is happy, liking their job. My horses can always opt out. I have a gate in the arena, and they're trained that if they stand at that gate for longer than 10 seconds, I mean, they may stand there and go, oh, a bird, that looks nice. But if they're there and I can tell, then that horse can leave because sometimes it's not their day. But that's happened once in the 15 years I've been back at this ranch. So the horses
And
can,
when you use the term horse, can that be mules, donkeys, and horses? Yeah. Okay.
yeah. And I do a training program for people. MEAs, Lee and Sue, who are facilitating the work at MEA, are in my training. I train people how to do this work and take good care of their horses. So,
Thank you.
mhm.
And that brings up a question because I've been asked this question numerous times. What is the difference between equine assisted learning and equine assisted therapy?
Equine assisted therapy has a licensed therapist.
Oh,
And so you're partnering with the horse, but the lens is therapeutic. And there's some intersection between coaching and therapy that can kind of happen. But
mhm,
in equine assisted learning, you've got someone who's either a coach or someone who is an educator or maybe a social worker. And with the EQUUS experience, all of our coaches are certified coaches. Again, it's not a regulated industry, so I feel like I feel strongly that the practitioners in this field need to be really good at holding the horse heart and
mhm,
really good at holding the human heart, both. So we
mhm.
we train people who are expert horse people and expert people.
And we honestly be remiss if we didn't, ask you about. I always know there's people that are interested in getting into that work themselves.
Mhm.
So I mean, we've talked about the MEA workshop, but what about your actual Equus training in terms of
Training.
teaching
Yes.
people, coaches and stuff to utilize that?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. It's about a year and a half program. You have to be either a licensed therapist or a PCC certified ICF coach and have had over 1,000 hours of horsemanship. Some people come to me who are wanting to get certified as a coach, and so I let them run their certification program alongside my training. So, and every year I open a cohort. So, we'll start our next cohort in 2026, and it's only open to 8 people max. I keep it very small because it's a very intensive, high touch training program. And I'm just very dedicated to making sure that I turn out some talented practitioners and also helping them to create a business out of this, because just because you're a great coach doesn't mean you know how to run a business. And that doesn't help anybody if you can't make it all work. So we kind of do the whole thing.
Yeah. And Stephanie, I see you asked a question in the chat here, how much time, no riding, correct? So yes, uh, this isn't a riding workshop.
Nope. Mm-mm.
That's not what this is about.
No.
This is about spending time with the horses and, throughout the
And
week.
actually, Derek, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah,
It's
fire
really
away.
a workshop about yourself.
Yeah.
It is 100% you and your relationship to you and how you just how you advocate for yourself, how you're an ally to yourself, how you're not. Um, and and so that, yeah.
Yeah, good. All right. Well, we're almost at the top of the hour here. I don't see any more hands up. So we've got the workshop as we've talked about. I think Connor's linked to it there. If you're interested, go check that out. If you have any
I'm
questions,
excited. We're
hit
gonna
up
get
our
into lots
advisor.
of
Super
trouble.
excited. I'm going to try and schedule so I'm there so I can get some of the Kelly magic and see you in action with the horses.
Thanks, Derek.
And on that note, thank you very much, everybody. Great to see everybody. And we will see you guys again real soon. Kelly, thank you so much.
Thanks, Derek. Thank you
All
for
right.
the really great conversation. Have a great day.
Fantastic.